Hi, I'm Rick Levine, and I'm here today with a mid-month astrological update for March 2020. These mid-month updates are normally made available to my solar tier Patreon subscribers, but there's little normal about this month's update, so I'm making this available to the public. Share it, please, if you think the message is useful. And, of course, thanks to my Patreon subscribers who make videos like this possible. Humanity is in an unprecedented and unplanned, spontaneously self-imposed shutdown of previously inconceivable proportions. And it's at times like these that the immediate relevance of astrology cannot be denied. That is, unless you, like too many people on the planet, are in denial of astrology and a much wider set of cosmic perspectives. We'll get to the astrology in just a moment, but I first must address the proverbial elephant in the room that has nearly overnight pulled us out of our regular routines of living life as we normally do and has placed us into a strange new world where no one has quick and easy answers to our current dilemma. In fact, I would say that if anyone you meet has all the answers, get the hell out of there, because they don't. It's one of the dangers of these times is people assuming that they know what's going on. However, we would do well to remember that in Chinese, the word for crisis is contained with two symbols, one of them meaning emergency and the other meaning opportunity. Yes, we are in new territory, but there is some understanding and comfort that can be had from the ancient teachings of astrology, which have led to a modern revival and renaissance. The astrology we do today is very different than the astrology that our ancestors did, because we have tools that they could have never even imagined. We modern astrologers can log on to our computers and we can dial time backwards and forward as the computer calculates and draws maps of these discrete moments in time as quickly as we can put the dates in. This is what we call horoscopes. Horoscope, horo, hour, scope, from the Greek, scope, view. A horoscope is a view of the hour. Although most people who follow planetary movement, who use astrology, most people use it to better their own lives or to understand individual behavior in themselves, their family, their lovers, their employers, their employees, what's going on today. But there is also an astrology of the world called mundane astrology. Mundane, the word mundane comes from a Latin word mundus, which means world. This is world astrology. And for those of you who want a deeper perspective, a deeper understanding of this critical moment in time, please watch my YouTube video on the history of the Saturn-Pluto cycle. I'll put the link in the comments, in the YouTube comments below, and here on the screen also. Probably most of you know about the intense history associated with the cycle, the 29-year cycle of Saturn and the 243-year cycle of Pluto, because I, and for that matter, most other astrologers have been talking about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of January 12th, 2020, that was 2 months ago, for months, if not years. In fact, there are those of us who have been anticipating the events of 2020 since the Saturn-Pluto opposition that was connected with the 9/11 incidents and how that event changed everything back then. Although the circumstances were quite different from today's coronavirus pandemic, there was a lockdown on travel. There was a contagion of fear and uncertainty. And the subsequent anthrax poisonings actually closed Congress for a few days. Nevertheless, these times are quite different. And I'm reminded of Ram Dass, who taught of the saying, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Trust in Allah, but tie your camel. This saying is an ancient Arab phrase that was, I think, it was attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, who one day saw a Bedouin leaving his camel without tying it up, without tethering it, and he questioned him as to why he was doing this. And obviously, it's fine to trust in Allah, God, the intelligence of the cosmos, whatever you choose to call it. It doesn't matter to me. However, it's still important to tie your camel. There are so many conspiratorial stories circulating about this virus. It's an escaped bioweapon, perhaps, perhaps not. There's a lot of data about its connection with 5G. Those are the millimeter length electromagnetic radiations that are connected with the new internet that's being installed around the planet. There's a wealth of information about its harmful effects on the immune system, and no one in power seems to care about that. There are those who believe the general population is just sleeping, not aware of what's going on. There are those who are in denial. There are those who are in fear. All of these are important and fascinating things to explore, but I'm not interested in addressing any of these issues today. Remember, the word conspiracy comes from two words, conspire. Con means as one or together, and spire is to breathe, like inspiration or inspire or perspire, or conspire simply means breathing together. Now, we need a conspiracy now, today, driven by common sense and practicality. There is, whether we like it or not, whether we feel vulnerable or not, there's an urgency to this conspiracy. I mean, we can untangle all the other questions, accusations, political agendas, whatever, as we move forward at another time. But right now, we simply need to act like grown-ups. We need to be responsible. We need to take this forced shutdown seriously, but not in fear. There is no place for fear right now. We have an opportunity, back to the Chinese concept of crisis being emergency and opportunity. We have an opportunity from this crisis to begin a deeper readjustment to our entire direction as a species. I'm not saying that this is going to solve anything overnight, but it's obvious. You don't need to be an astrologer. You don't even need to be very smart to understand that humanity cannot sustain its current course of evolution. I mean, just look at the species extinctions, climate change, pollution. I mean, the list is long. Whatever your take on any of these is, we can't grow at this rate of growth forever. This crisis is an opportunity to go inward and to reevaluate what's important while tying your camels. Be practical. Take care of yourself. Take care of your immune systems. Build your strength. Use this time wisely. Okay, I know I'm going to get flack from people who will post on the YouTube channel, he didn't start until 5 minutes in or whatever. However, astrology is of no use at all if it's practiced in a vacuum. We have to relate it to what's going on in our lives, and to leave this whole issue of this global situation that we've never been in before, to leave this aside would just be silly. So now let's shift gears. Let's look at the astrology for the rest of the month and kind of see how that allows things to unfold. And remember, like I cautioned you not to trust anyone who has all the answers, I don't have all the answers, and certainly don't trust me if I seem like I do, because everything is just another point of view. The value, however, of astrology is that it gives us a larger framework of movement upon which we can see and understand and untangle the patterns. Let's begin by looking at a chart for noon, March 18th, Wednesday, March 18th. These charts are all East Coast time, New York time. And they all have Aries rising, which means that we're not looking at houses. We're just looking at signs and the relationships between the planets. That way, wherever you are on the globe, this chart will make sense for the times converted to your local time zone. Now, we do notice in this chart that we have a whole bunch of planets, actually Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Moon, Saturn, and the south node of the Moon, all clustered in Capricorn. That's been going on for a while. Remember, we're coming off of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that was exact back in mid-January, January 12th. And right now, the Moon is coming through that area, which will certainly re-stimulate some of the energies of that times. Obviously, a lot of this has never really left us, but we're getting an intensification of it right now. We also have the sun at 28 degrees of Pisces, and the sun actually moves into Aries tomorrow night on Thursday, the 19th, and that is the first day of spring. Of course, depending upon where you are, that will either be on Thursday or possibly even on Friday, but we'll get to that in just a moment. The other thing I want to note before we move on is that Mercury, which had moved back into Aquarius, Mercury had retrograded back into Aquarius, now has moved back into Pisces, is at 1 degree of Pisces, and is moving forward. We'll watch that Mercury as it gains speed in the days and even weeks ahead. But the thing here that I want to begin with is the fact that this month has already been extraordinary. Obviously, with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that's a once every 35, 38 years cycle. That is playing throughout this entire year, and almost everything that happens this year in some way will relate back to that particular conjunction. However, we do now have Mercury going direct after Mercury had turned retrograde. And we also have Saturn at the very last degree of Capricorn, and that Saturn is going to change signs and move into Aquarius on the 21st. We'll get there also in just a moment. But the combination of the sun moving into Aries and Saturn moving into Aquarius really does change the flavor a little bit. And this isn't a for better or for worse. It just changes the flavor. And we'll get to what that flavor might be in just a few minutes. The thing is that on Wednesday, the 18th, the moon moving through Capricorn is going to really make things feel heavy, serious. We might get an overload of intensity today that as we move from Wednesday, the 18th to the 19th, and we now have the moon having moved into Aquarius, and then we move to the 20th. Actually, it's late at night on the 19th that the that the sun moves from Pisces into Aries. But we now are in the first full day of spring on the 20th. And we also have the sun as it moves into Aries just prior to it moving into Aries, actually on the 19th. It forms a sextile with Saturn, not quite yet moving into Aquarius. And so on Thursday, the 19th, we may get a little bit of stability or some reality check. Remember, Saturn is neither good nor bad, but it certainly does or can give us a new look and a new view at it, with the sun moving into Aries later that day, but it forming that sextile with Saturn. then on the 20th, also what happens is that back here in Capricorn, we have Mars, which has been moving through Capricorn, and Mars catches up with Jupiter today. With Jupiter, Mars, Pluto, and Saturn all in Capricorn, Mars is the fastest moving of those planets. So today on March 20th, on Friday, March 20th, Mars lines up with Jupiter, which, again, good news, bad news, who's to tell? But Mars and Jupiter are overinflated. They're big. They can be incredibly optimistic, but it also can be like a greater jump in numbers of virus spreading. I'm not saying that's what will happen. I'm just saying that Mars and Jupiter together are expansive. But the thing about this Mars lining up with Jupiter on Thursday is that, on Friday, the 20th, is that on Monday, Mars will catch up to Pluto, that's the 23rd, and then the following Tuesday, it will catch up to Saturn, and that's on the 31st. So what we have is Mars activating and energizing all of this heavy governmental, remember, Capricorn is the sign of structure. It's the sign of government and banks and economics and roads and bridges and things that are stable and structure. And when we have Mars, the planet of heat, of intensity, of war, of anger, Mars stirring things up, first lining up with Jupiter, and then on the 23rd lining up with Pluto. I think things could get a bit nasty, a bit difficult here when Mars lines up with Pluto. And then when Mars lines up with Saturn at the end of the month, that can be literally hitting the wall. But I think that things then begin to clear up quite quickly, or at least move along quite quickly once Mars once Mars lines up with Saturn on the 31st and then moves into Aquarius. And in fact, the beginning of April, when Mars moves into Aquarius, we also have Jupiter inching towards its conjunction with Pluto, and that alignment occurs on April 4th, I think. Jupiter conjunct Pluto on April 4th, but we do have a retrograde there, and that Jupiter will turn retrograde in mid-May. It will line up with Pluto again on June 29th, turn direct, and line up with Pluto for the third and final time mid-November, November 12th, before finally moving into Aquarius on December 19th. And then 2 days later on the winter, or right around the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, Jupiter will line up with Saturn. Now, that's in Aquarius. Now, that's a whole lot, that's a big sentence of stuff. But what I'm trying to make the point here is that Jupiter going through all of these is going to intensify this energy even more. What we're in right now is not going to go away overnight. Obviously, that's written in the cards out there, but it's also written in the stars, if you will. And just following that Jupiter through the year until its conjunction with Saturn in December gives us an idea that 2020 is not going to be easy throughout the entire year. It doesn't mean that we will be on lockdown or whatever this is officially called, but it does mean that things are changing, and we are both blessed and cursed to live in this time of immense and powerful change. And again, I'm going to come back to this theme again today and always, and that is that we can't individually change everything out there. We can through conspiracy if we breathe together, but we can change ourselves. We can change our habits. We can change our routines. And some of these are coming down on us in a way that's forcing us to. And I think that this Jupiter moving through, remember, Jupiter doesn't like Capricorn. I personally have Jupiter in Capricorn. But traditionally in astrology, Jupiter is expansive and Capricorn is Saturn's sign. It's constrictive. And so in a way, we are in a time of dilemma where we see the growth and the growth potential, but it's restrained. And I think it will be until Saturn and until Jupiter catches up with Saturn in December, and then everything is moving on into Aquarius. So coming back to March 20th, we have that Mars-Jupiter conjunction, which I think may be an explosion of something that could be very positive. It could be hope, it could be optimism, but it also could just be a spreading of the numbers. But that occurs right before the following day, on Saturday, on the 21st, the moon moves into Pisces, and Saturn moves into Aquarius. So on the 21st, we have Saturn here at noon at 29 degrees 58 minutes of Capricorn, but by the evening on the west coast of the United States, by late night, actually almost midnight in New York, Saturn will tick on into Aquarius, and by the 22nd, we will wake up in a world where Saturn, having moved into Aquarius, where things are different. Now, I'll do a longer video when I do my April forecast video, where we'll spend more time talking about Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn is now moved into Aquarius. That Saturn will stay in Aquarius until July. Saturn turns retrograde in mid-May, on May 10th, and then it backs back up into Capricorn again. It doesn't come back as far as connecting up with Pluto again, but it does back into Capricorn on July 1st, and then it turns direct in September, and then moves on into Aquarius on December 16th, just a few days before Jupiter moves into Aquarius and joins it. So we have this amazing period of time where we have this intensity in Capricorn. Again, Capricorn is the sign of government. It's structure, it's traditional, it's fundamental. And with Saturn moving through Capricorn, it's tested these structures in a way that in modern history have never been tested in this way, both economically, globally, certainly politically, around the world. But I'm thinking of, Brexit in England and the politics of Trump in the United States. Saturn in Capricorn has been a real test, but as Saturn moves into Aquarius, the energy will change. Things will become more rigid. Capricorn, even though we think of it as a difficult sign, Saturn, in traditional astrology, Saturn rules or is connected with both Capricorn and Aquarius. So even when Saturn moves into Aquarius, it's still going to be strong, but in Aquarius breaks out of the tradition, but it's a fixed sign. Saturn in Aquarius knows the rules, and yet it figures out ways to make them different and break out into other realms. I think we're going to be amazed by what happens in the 2.5 years as Saturn moves through Aquarius. But right now, let it just suffice to say that we end the month with the taste of what will be coming up and around the bend in the months to come, in the years to come, as Saturn moves into Aquarius. Now that happens on the 20th, 21st, 22nd. That happens on the 21st. By the 22nd, Saturn, that's a Sunday, the 22nd, Saturn is in Aquarius. And we also have the moon moving through Pisces. We're getting a little bit of the dreamy factor here, the hopes and the possibility, but the moon actually joins up with Neptune. Let's get the spotlight on that. The moon actually joins up with Neptune late night. No, let's see. The moon joins up with Neptune. About 10:38 p.m. Eastern time. So during that day on Sunday, we might be caught up in fantasies, but remember, Neptune is also uncertainty and confusion. So we have this new world with Saturn having moved into Capricorn, and yet I think we might not know quite what to make of it. We get to the 23rd, and now Mars, which just a few days ago lined up with Jupiter, now Mars is lining up with Pluto. I think we're going to feel this all weekend, but it's exact on early Monday morning. And again, this is Mars firing up that energy of the underworld, of the intensity, of the shadow realms. We got stuff coming out into the open. My now deceased buddy partner Jeff Jower used to say that when Mars and Pluto got together, you knew you were in a tough neighborhood. It can be a nasty energy because Mars is the god of war and Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. So this is also about an unstoppable force, that things can come out in the open now that may not be pretty, but they're easier to deal with once they're in the open than when they were hidden. Now remember, this is Mars still coming through Capricorn, and it's not until the 31st that Mars reaches Saturn. So Mars is right now already contacted the underworld, but it hasn't quite reached its limit. And so it's interesting to see that Mars will actually catch up with Saturn, and that will be a kind of a final knock on the door. That'll happen on the 20. That'll happen on the 31st, on the last day of the month. We move along, and incidentally, that means that Mars changes signs and moves into Aquarius on just the day before that, on the 30th, but we'll get there in a minute. So moving this ahead, on the 23rd, we have a relatively smooth morning. The moon in Pisces is making a series of sextiles to Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars, and yet the sun is squaring the nodes. And remember, we've been in the situation where Chiron has been squaring the nodes, and this is part of the whole, the rough part about the healing piece in here, about the out-of-the-box maverick Chiron, and Chiron squaring the nodes. And now the sun, as it moves into Aries, remember on the first day of spring, the sun will actually square the nodes on Monday, the 23rd, and it will catch up with Chiron on the 25th. Here you can see the sun on the 24th at 4 degrees of Aries, already having squared the nodes and coming into the conjunction. But we need to back this up a touch because we need to hit the new moon. There's the new moon. The actual moment of the new moon is at 5:28 a.m. And here we have the sun and the moon at 4 degrees of Aries and 12 minutes. But note that this sun-moon conjunction, this new moon in Aries, which is a new beginning as the equinox, is the start of the astrological year back on the 19th when the sun moves into Aries, late on the 19th, early on the 20th, depending on where you are. But this new moon in Aries is really a re-emphasizing of the newness of the year. And it's not an easy start because this new moon is square the nodes, and it is conjunct Chiron. So we have this issue of the, the wounded healer, of the maverick, of the teacher, of the mentor. Chiron has something to teach us if we can be vulnerable enough to admit that we don't know everything. This is an energy that we need to engage rather than resist. I think of my dear friend, Caroline Casey, who I had the opportunity of teaching with in Bali last fall. Caroline says that when we have an aspect like this, it's not about dealing with it, it's about dancing with it, almost Aikido-like rather than boxing. So in boxing, everything gets blocked and then you hit back. In Aikido, anything that comes in is taken as energy and it's used to ripple through the system and help the change occur. So this new moon is really a cleansing and a moving into a new territory. We have Saturn in a new sign, and this new moon is incredibly powerful. It's an important new moon. And the fact that it is conjunct Chiron is important. Also, I might note that this new moon, although it's not shown here, this new moon is actually a half a square to Venus. And the half square between the sun and Venus and the moon and Venus is annoying. It's irritating. It's kind of like Venus in Taurus just wants her senses fed in a pleasant way, and yet with everything that's going on now, she isn't necessarily going to get what she wants. Now, as we move forward, on the 25th, also not drawn in here, but also part of this new moon, is the sun on the 25th makes a quintile with Jupiter. Now, the quintile is 72 degrees, and what that really means is that the moon is also making a quintile with Jupiter through the new moon. And we can see here that the the moon is separated from the sun, but the sun is now making a 72-degree angle with Jupiter. It'll continue to make those quintiles in the days and weeks ahead with Pluto and with Saturn eventually, and Mars. It's kind of moving at the same speed of Mars. It won't get there for a while. But the fact is that this Sun quintile Jupiter on the 25th is also a potential for creativity. This is a potential for seeing the bigger picture and making something positive happen. Remember, quintiles aren't always easy. They aren't always nice, but they're about manifestation. They're about the creation of that which only existed in the metaphysical or spiritual realms into that which is real. So this is certainly a day to focus on those energies, and that is Tuesday and the Tuesday the 24th at the new moon, and Wednesday the 25th when the sun actually reaches its conjunction with Chiron. We can see that the sun is at the same degree, 5 degrees of Aries on the 25th. The moon in Aries through this period of time is really kind of pushing us to take action and to think about how we can move forward in these strange times. On the morning of March 26th, that's a Thursday, the moon moves at 9:36 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The moon moves into Taurus, and in other more normal times, this would settle energy down. But of course, as the moon is moving through the last degrees of Aries and into Taurus, that moon is going to form squares with Jupiter. This is on the 25th, with Jupiter and Pluto and Mars. And when it moves into Taurus, the morning at 9 o'clock, or what did we say, 9:36 a.m. on Thursday morning, the 26th, the moon will immediately make a square to Saturn. That's at 10:15 a.m. And by 7:30 p.m., 7:20 p.m., 7:28 p.m., the moon will actually catch up with Uranus and make a conjunction with Uranus. So what we have here is the dilemma of the moon moving into Taurus and saying everything's cool, we can adjust, we can have a position that we can hold even if everything is, disrupted or disruptive. On the other hand, that moon squaring Saturn, Mars and Saturn, it's like we've hit a wall, and then when the moon conjuncts Uranus, it's like a feeling, it's like stir crazy. It's like we want to break out. Something happens here that can change things, that can change how we feel, or that can change our relationship to our immediate and local environment. On Friday, the 27th, although it's not marked here, on Friday the 27th, Mercury in Pisces makes a half square with Mars, And there may be a day when we can find ourselves entangled in conversations that can be conflictive, that we really didn't have to do, but somehow we got nudged into it, or we created it because of fear, of anxiety, of ego stuff, of insecurity. Mercury semi-square to Mars can just create flare-ups. On the other hand, we can use this creatively to get things done, to think about how we want to say something, and maybe even wait to say it until the aspect is past. Because we don't necessarily need to stir up trouble. Although if you're looking to stir up trouble, this would be a good time to do that. That's on the 27th. On Saturday, the 28th, the moon is still in Taurus, but now it aligns with Venus. The moon's conjunction with Venus happens in the morning on Saturday. And in fact, this is a really interesting piece here, because we also have early on Saturday morning, we have Venus in Taurus forming a trine with Pluto. Sorry, Venus making that trine with Pluto is very significant because it intensifies the power of our feelings in a way that really allows us to touch some places that we might not normally go to, and yet it's a trine. It's less difficult than it normally is. And as the moon comes through those degrees, the moon will line up with Venus and then will trine Pluto. And actually, because it moves so quickly, then we'll trine Mars and we'll trine Saturn. But as that moon is lining up with Venus and trining Pluto, I think we have, and Jupiter, it trines Jupiter first. I've been saying Pluto, but it does both of them. The Venus trines Jupiter first early this morning on Saturday morning, and it trines Pluto late at night. So the entire day has this Venus trine with Pluto, with this Venus trine Jupiter and Pluto, with the moon ripping through it, kind of re-emphasizing it and making it, I think, possibly very sweet. In fact, the moon then goes on to trine Mars, and then the moon moves from Taurus into Gemini later on the day, Thursday evening, and by Friday, the moon is in Gemini, and of course, as the moon moves from Taurus to Gemini, it's also going to make that trine with Saturn, stabilizing things a little bit. But once the moon is in Gemini by late Saturday night and then early on Sunday, the 29th, I think here, this is kind of a day of regrouping. There's not a lot going on astrologically, but as we know, often when there's not a lot going on astrologically, those are the days when everything hits and we catch up with ourselves and we process the things that we've been putting off. That is Sunday. Then on Monday, we have Mars actually making its shift, not until later in the evening. Here you can see Mars at 29 degrees and 54 minutes of Capricorn. It at 3:43 p.m. Eastern time actually moves into Aquarius. And other than that, there's not a lot of action during the day. The moon does make a square with Neptune earlier in the day, or actually mid-morning. But it's kind of a floater day, except as Mars moves into Aquarius and approaches Saturn, we're getting the sense that we're in something for the long haul. We're hitting that wall again. Saturn is we've reached a limit. There's something here that has to happen, and in one way or another, we need to kind of pay attention to the limits of Saturn while still using Mars to lean on it and to push ahead, but without exhausting ourselves. There could actually be some frustration and exhaustion tied up with this, the 30th, and the actual conjunction on the 31st. You can see here that midday, Mars is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, 35 minutes. Saturn is at 0 degrees Aquarius, 39 minutes. And if we just push this ahead an hour or two. You can see there it is right there. By mid-afternoon, that Mars is already lined up with and freeing itself from Saturn, which actually brings us to, and the other thing is that morning, the moon shifts into Cancer at 7:43 a.m. This is the 31st on Tuesday morning. And that's a bit of pulling back. That's a bit of pulling in that corresponds with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is also about self-restraint or about pulling in. But I think it's interesting that as we move forward ahead a day or two here, once the moon moves out of Cancer into Leo by April 2nd, Mars is beginning to separate itself from Saturn, but Jupiter has still got one last, again, this is the first of three, but in its current run, Jupiter still has to conjunct Pluto, and that occurs on April 4th. And we'll get to that in the April overview, but I think that April is really a game changer. It doesn't necessarily free us from where we are or where we've been, but it does allow us to shift gears a bit. So that's quite a couple of weeks, and it's been quite a month. It's undoubtedly a month like no one has ever seen before. Even those people who claim they have seen it all, even those of us, my generation, who lived through the 60s, our parents' generations, who lived, my parents' generation, who lived through World War II, people who have been through all kinds of situations. This is different. This is unique. And part of what makes this so different is that with the intercommunication that we have because of digital technology, things move much faster than ever before. Things can change on a dime. And in fact, we've seen that occur we're on that dime right now. And for those of you who are listening overseas, the dime of all the coins in the United States are the smallest in size. And it's the idea of things can change in a moment. We can change directions instantaneously. We live in a quantum mechanical universe where a thought can change everything. And I'm going to just cycle back one more time on my opening message. And that is, yes, there's crazy shit happening out there. Fate is what happens to us. Free will is how we respond to what happens to us. Situations may be intense for some people, may not be any big deal to some people who are just looking at this as a couple of week holiday of not having to go outside. It may be life and death situations for others. It may be death situations for others. Whatever it is for you, you still are free in how you respond to it. Respond with love, not fear. Respond with compassion, not judgment. And I've just got totally, completely preachy, but it's really important that when things get crazy, when things get strange, we remember the spiritual teachings, the teachings that we've had throughout our life. I think of the Dalai Lama who says, it's good to be compassionate when you can. And then he says, and you always can. I don't care how bad or how dire the situation is, keep in mind that there's something that we can learn from this. There's some ways in which we can incorporate this into our lives and something that we can grow from it. There will be another side. There will be an other side to this, and I will see you all in a couple of weeks. I'm Rick Levine. Think cosmically, but act locally.